All right, so let's introduce then Whitehead's quote unquote philosophy of organism then, in light of what we've said. We're going to make that connection. So let's recap just briefly. Okay, so Whitehead uses your experience as the best clue to what the fundamental process of reality is like. Right? After all, you exemplify and you're not exempt from the world. Okay, so it's not done naively. It's not done in an anthropocentric or purely anthropomorphic way. It's done based in the idea that you're intricately wedded to this world. Okay, in a deep sense, you've grown out of it. Okay, you didn't drop in from somewhere else. And I like this element or this notion of growing. Right, it's this organic metaphor. Okay, you've grown out of the world as a plant grows out of the soil. I mean, think about that for a moment. You belong here. Every ounce of carbon in your body, as the physicists tell us, was forged in the nuclear furnaces of stars. It's all connected. One growing giant organism. I mean, it's just totally baffling to think about this, and beautiful and daunting in a deep sense. Okay? Think about a flower. A flower is intrinsically connected to the nature of the soil from which it's grown. Okay, you are intrinsically connected to the nature of the world out of which you've grown, right? These aren't absurd comparisons, given what we now know about the world. Unless you're willing to say that we simply dropped in somewhere else, or unless you're willing to say that which science hasn't shown, certainly with evolutionary continuity, or theologically that God has supernaturally created us as utterly different in kind than everything else, right? So in some sense, we can be detached from creation. So Whitehead then is certified organic. He's going to say, when you're shopping philosophically, buy organic, okay? And I'm not just being playful. So his is an organic universe. It's an interdependent universe of process, interconnection, and experience. Okay, and as mentioned before, he doesn't call his philosophy process philosophy, okay, despite the title of his book, but simply the philosophy of organism, right? And it gets at this notion of this organic, growing, flower-like, budding, blossoming universe that is coming alive in every single moment. So
Andrew,
yes,
where does process philosophy nomenclature come from then?
I believe, yeah, great question, John. Well, I mean, it certainly would come from, in some sense, the title, but I think the first one to use the language of process theology, at least, was Bernard Loomer. I forget his exact dates. He's been gone for some time now, but was a very significant influence in process philosophy and process theology. So if I recall, that dates back to him, perhaps sooner. But Whitehead uses the language of organism. But it's a great thought. In fact, I'll double check on that because now you have me thinking about it. Okay, so let's back up just for a moment. So Whitehead develops this organic conception, particularly in his book Science in the Modern World, which I'd recommend to everyone, in direct opposition to this mechanistic philosophy of the 17th and 18th century. Okay, and again, let's look at a dichotomy just because it's sort of helpful to see the comparison between these two kind of worldviews. So in a mechanistic worldview, nature is like a determined machine. In an organic universe, it's like a growing organism. Okay, these are metaphors. Independent bits of dead matter would say a more mechanistic worldview. But living relational interdependence would say the organic process universe. Okay, a clock has external relationships, like a mechanistic kind of universe, whereas an organic universe is not just externally, but also internally related in a significant way. There's an interiority. So a clock universe is not constituted by its relationships in some sense. You can take it apart and you wouldn't do harm to the individual parts. You put them back together and it works again. Whereas a organic universe is fundamentally constituted by these relationships. If you're to dice up its pieces, you're doing harm to everything because it's all utterly connected. Okay, so one would say externally designed. Think of the image of God designing a world external to God's self, a clock-like universe, or a human being designing a watch outside himself. Whereas an organic universe is going to emphasize much more this internal self-creation, this internal blossoming. Okay, how about the distinction between push and pull, right? This sort of coercive push and pull, clockwork, versus evoking and feeling, this persuasion almost. Okay, we're going to see how Whitehead imagines God acting in this persuasive way. Okay, there may be surface level movement for the mechanistic universe, but there's real evolution for this organic universe. Okay, finally, different ways of thinking about it as a clock, a watch, a machine, versus a plant, an animal, and yes, your own experience. Okay, so as Hosinski says, Whitehead's convinced that the actualities of the universe and the universe as a whole are more like organisms than they are like machines. And it's remarkable. You'll find people today who still assume in some way a dominant metaphor of a machine-like universe. Okay, a dead, inert sort of universe that somehow produces you as a living, experiencing, valuing being. Okay, questionable. Okay, and he found that this metaphor, the switch from mechanism to organism, is not substantiated by science. In fact, he came to this notion through science itself. He says physics itself suggests this view. Okay, and now this is an important dimension of Whitehead's profile. Okay, and it would be this, that Whitehead is not simply working with philosophy to come to an organic vision of things, okay, but was deeply, more than many, invested in the sciences. And again, I'd encourage everyone to look at Science in the Modern World. I don't have it here, but it really is an excellent book. It's a critique of the scientific tradition and also praise of those who are pioneering new ideas. So to give a few examples, the psychology of Whitehead's time, okay, remember William James, for example, is stimulating us to think in terms of streams of consciousness, okay, rather than inert sort of categories, or it's a film reel that's moving like fluid water in some sense. Okay, what about in developmental biology? Okay, it's stimulating us to think in terms of organic evolutionary growth. Again, this growing metaphor on a micro level, also on a macro level. Okay, sciences of electromagnetism, which Whitehead was deeply invested in, began to think in terms of interconnected force fields, okay, rather than simply a gravitational push and pull, right? This interconnected field-like metaphor. Okay, and in quantum physics and relativity, we started to think in terms of waves of energetic relational potential events, okay, rather than pellets of dead matter. Matter has dissolved in a certain deep sense in the quantum world. Space and time, okay, are not going to be totally separate things, but space-time together, right? They're interdependent, right? And this is a fundamental part of the sciences of relativity. So notice his statement.